So you have different kinds of things. If you want to starve in the desert, you can buy that kind of adventure now. They'll take you by helicopter. They do this in Canada. They do this survival tourism. Survival tourism, you fucking nuts. Survival tourism. You can sell them any kind of shit, anything. It's an adventure. We're going to drop you off in the tundra 800 miles from any human being and 30 millimeters from the nearest million horseflies. And good luck. We're not going to give you any food, and we'll pick you up in a week. If you have a problem, you can phone us. It'll take us 24 hours to get there. And it's like, yes. And they get charged $14,000. Can you imagine? Fly them up in a helicopter, you drop people off in the middle of nowhere. People are bitching about paying 100 euros for a room. Talk about insanity, Have an adventure. And there they go. So we sell adventurism for people who have lost any sense of purpose, who don't feel full of life because they're afraid of death. And so this is the great gate of selling, hey, let's have some fun. Think about that with a 28. A 28 is really turned on by moments of the unexpected. They really are. If you're a 28 and you have a car accident and it's not too serious, after you get over the initial shock, there's a rush of joy. It's like, wow, I made it. And you're giggling hysterically, right? Splenic center laugh. So you're giggling hysterically. Yeah, that was good. It's almost like, let's have another one. Why do you think they have bumper cars? Bang, yeah. So selling adventure is really something. It's a huge market. And of course, nobody finds, well, not nobody, but very few people find their purpose being dropped off in the middle of an airplane, in the middle of the tundra. But in that moment of participating in that, they do have a sense of being alive. And you can see the drama and the tragedy and the pathos that's there in the 28th gate. This desperate need to feel alive, to feel, to have that sense of aliveness. There must be purpose in your life. Otherwise, there is no aliveness. So you sell these moments of artificial aliveness. Huh? It's cute. Unfounded risk-taking. Oh yes, the business application. Unfounded risk-taking. This is, you're drunk one night and somebody says, we should really do this. And you go, yes, aye. And for a little while, it's really exciting. You feel alive. Until the door slams. Anyway, sort of like that one. Here's the one that's not so nice. The 32nd gate, gate of failure. Fear of failure. The only thing which endures is change. One of the great headings for a hexagram. One of the great truths, is that the only thing that endures is change. And remember, this is tribal. It's a great lesson for the tribe, that the tribe must mature, that the tribe must transform, that the tribe must go through changes in order to endure. And if the tribe doesn't go through changes, it will not endure. It's one of the basic premises. The great fear, because this is deeply material, it's tribal, this is the capitalist side of tribal materialism. The 32nd gate is the personnel manager. It's the one that assesses value. It's the one that assesses value in people. Whether the 54 that's at the other end is capable of becoming a 45 in the completion of its process. To be able to recognize talent within the tribe, to be able to nurture skills within the tribe, to be able to provide the tribe with homegrown industries through which the tribe and the community benefit. All of that's in the 32. But it's a fear of failure. It's a fear of failure. The fear of failure is overwhelming. I mean, after all, and it's not just the fear of failure on the mundane plane, on the business application that we're looking at here. It's the fear of failure in the life. It's a fear of failure of the species. It's a fear of failure in God. You know, that goes all the way down. You can find every single layer of it. Eh? And by the way, God's busy. Never mind. Another joke. The third line is lack of continuity. Lack of continuity. Through the 30-second gate, you sell people anything that will help them get over their fear of failure. And we all know that there's a zillion things you can sell people to help them get over their fear of failure. You can sell them drugs, you know. I mean, you can sell them just about anything, you know, to try to help them get over their fear of failure. And one of the things about it is that all of it is about the teaching of continuity. How to maintain continuity. You know, the only thing that endures is change. But change doesn't mean that things have to die on the vine. You know, change is something that can be evolutionary. And though what began as A ends up being Z, there is a line of continuity. And it's this line of continuity that's so important. This is the survival of the tribe, the continuity. Yes, the tribe used to hunt with shields and spears. You know, now the tribe goes to supermarkets in Porsches. You know, but there is still a continuity. The tribe is still together. There is still the continuity of the processes of the tribe. It's a you know, they are supporting each other and so forth and so on. So very important, this lack of continuity, indecision and persistent reevaluation that only because of its basic intelligence manages to endure. Indecision in times of transformation. And this is one of the basic dilemmas in business. You know, the whole thing about a business is that a business, any kind of enterprise, is structured theoretically. And yet we know that, you know, life is not like that. And no matter how good your formula is, you know, you're going to meet the fates. You're going to meet bumps in the road. You're going to meet changing times. You know, it's great that you just built a hotel on the banks of the Tigris, you know, and all of a sudden George bombs it. And it's like, well, you know, bad timing, you know, I'm sorry, you know. It's like these people that on the West, I think it was in the West Bank, you know, they built a casino. They built a fucking casino. Are they crazy? Are they crazy? They built a casino. Suicide bombers live next door. You know, who's going to go to that casino? Nobody. And there's this huge, empty elephant, you know, that's sitting there. I mean, there is madness in the world, right? Okay, so one of the things to recognize is that every single enterprise has to deal with the fact that failure is guaranteed if there's no continuity. Period. It's just guaranteed. You know, in the age of mergers and acquisitions, which is fortunately mostly over, it was a disaster. Because unless you have a very clean line of continuity, unless there is true sense of support in the tribal sense that allows continuity, the company whose name disappears. You know, you got a company that's 30 years old. It has its own culture, it has its own movement, it has its own continuity, it has its tribal roots in the company town, all of that stuff, and the ABC globalization conglomerate buys it and shoves it in some deep back pocket. You know, and slowly but surely you have deterioration in that because there is a death that takes place rather than a continuity. And it's one of the basic things to recognize. Now, I'm simplifying these things, but I want you to grasp something about the essence of making money. The essence of making money is that it's a living process. It's a living process. It's not a stagnant process. It's living, and it's a living interaction. It's an energy field. It's an energy prana. Things change. Circumstances change. You can have a company that gets by virtually, because you don't really have a personality that walks in the door that can make your company work at a person-to-person basis. And then suddenly you have a person like that walk in the door. You're not going to stick them to the virtual. You grow with what's living. There's potential. You try something else. You evolve. It's all part of the process. And so here you have a very, very specific kind of, it's why in my simple language, when I first began to describe this circuitry, and I talked about this as the personnel manager, it really is about the recognition of the relationship between the times we live in and the potential of the talent that's available. And it is about this ability, adaptation, it is about this ability to constantly adapt. If you don't adapt, you die. If you don't change, you die. And in most cases, even if you have a very good product, if you don't change, you just stagnate. You stay at the same sort of level. This was my situation coming into the beginning of my third 7-year cycle. And I recognized that, this was going to be a straight line. This was going to be a stagnant field because it was very different than when I had started the cycle before or the cycle before that. The circumstances had changed. The personnel, in the larger sense, had changed. And the demands of the times demanded an evolution. And if you don't change, you don't endure. No matter what the change brings. That's something else as well, is to recognize the way in which all things grow. Human design grew out of a single seed. And then it just grows. And by the time it gets big enough, it becomes something else. When you see the seed and you look at it, and you put it in the ground, it is not really possible for that seed to be able to live as a full tree with all its fruit. Different movie. So this is all about change, and it's all about understanding that a business cycle is a 7-year cycle, and that every single viable enterprise, whether it's a one-person entrepreneurial or it's a vast corporate enterprise, every single one of those enterprises have to go through transformation every 7 years or fail. Or fail. And of course, we have all kinds of merchants that will sell you what to do. But the real thing is, how well are you trained to be aware in your process? See, where I come from in terms of the hierarchy, when I look out at the hierarchical plane and I see that projectors were placed on the ascendancy, that it is clear to me that the only way in which we're going to operate successfully as a whole is if we are properly guided by those who are properly trained. I'm not talking about projectors the way I experience them now. In most cases, I think projectors really have a long way to go. But the moment that you have correctness out of the projector, which is the skill to ask rather than the conditioning to demand or tell, is the moment that we begin to have a way in which all enterprise should be guided. Because enterprise needs to be guided. It's there in all of the basic fears that we have. And it's there in almost all of the places that I go to, in this home mapping of the material plane, is to recognize that guidance is essential. It's essential. And whether that guidance is how you take in your openness to the outside, to the environment, to the changes, how well you're attuned to your own product, your own service, your own world. All of those things taken into consideration. But guidance is important because it's not stable. You can't trust the business formula. You can't. You can follow it to the very best of your ability, but you can't trust it because you know that life is going to get in the way. The 48th gate, the well. This is one of the most hilarious of the material lines for me. My first wife, not that I want to think about her particularly, but nonetheless, my first father-in-law never did get along with my in-laws. I do with my present mother-in-law. She didn't talk to me for the first 14 years I lived with her daughter. So we developed a nice relationship. But my first father-in-law really taught me something. It actually annoyed me deeply, deeply. He was an ignorant man. He had not been educated past maybe the 5th or 6th grade. He was crude. He was about as uncultured as an adult from my background that I had ever met. And he was a multi-millionaire. He was a self-made millionaire. And you would walk into his house and it looked like a surrealist on a bad acid trip had put it together. You know, you'd have 14th century priceless royal French furniture beside horribly ugly and expensive Danish modern. You'd have pictures that were enchanting to an idiot with a lobotomy hanging on the wall. And this guy had more money than God. And I couldn't get it. I mean, I couldn't get it. It was like, I don't get this. I don't get this. You know, I grew up, my dad was very successful, but he was a smart guy. You know, and it was like, okay, smart makes money, you know? And this was my father's trip with me. Smart makes money. You know, you're smart, you know how to make money. You're stupid, you don't know how to make money. You're stupid, you know, you're the guy carrying the boxes out of the grocery store. You know, if you're smart, you own the grocery chain. You know, this was this kind of smart, you know, smart. And then I meet this absolute abominable idiot. You couldn't have a conversation with this man with words that were larger than one syllable. I mean, he was an absolute idiot. And you know, he said to me one day, I'd like to see you as the owner of my, you know, blah, blah, blah. And I said, you want me to work with you? And he said, yes. And I said, no. I couldn't stand him. So anyway, I could keep going on for a long time on this one. My not self hated stupidity. I mean, my not self. I mean, it was the ugliest part of my personality. I couldn't stand stupidity. I mean, I did everything in my power to insult this man to his face. I couldn't stand him. He was an idiot. He didn't like me. From the day I married his daughter, he had me followed by detectives. Can you imagine? And they got such good pictures. Even the judge. Who was sitting under a huge crucifix. A huge crucifix. Her lawyers present the judge with photographs of me indulging in a public park. The 48th gate. The third line is incommunicado. We don't need a lot of depth to be successful. Have you ever seen those television ads or the back of these magazine ads where you too can be a millionaire? You can do it at home in your spare time. You know, you can earn $20,000 a week in your spare time. And there are 8 million idiots who respond to that. And the thing that's amazing is that some of them actually make millions. Which, of course, is really good for the business to get all the others. And it's one of these things to understand about business. You don't have to be a genius. It's not smart that makes you successful as a business person. It isn't. Nothing wrong with it. You know, I'm not saying that we should only have lobotomized executives. You know, I don't think that that in the end is the solution. But you know, it's something very obvious to me over the years when in my own insights into politics, is that I realize that the most powerful politicians are the least intelligent. It's always so surprising. You know, the Reagans and the Bushes. You know, Clinton, a Rhodes Scholar, you know, but give us a Reagan, you know, who needed a script to know how to say hello. You know, and you have this enormous force. And the thing about it is that by not being deep, you're simple and on the surface, and that's what making money is all about. It's simple stuff. You know, it's desire or passion or need. You know, it's the fulfillment of desire or passion or need. It's all very simple. It's all very simple. You got a problem, here are the 20 steps to solve it. You know, you want to get rich, here are the 20 steps for getting rich. You know how many get quick rich schemes there are in the world? It's incredible. And the reality is that even though we know most of them are hoaxes in the sense that they don't make everybody rich, the reality is because they even have any kind of success is an indicator that business in and of itself, that financial success in and of itself isn't about intelligence. I know that from my own personal history. My father was one of 11 children, one of 13 actually, the 2 didn't survive. And 2 of them were women, 9 of them were males. 4 of them were sent out to work to support 5 of them going to school. 5 of them became doctors, 4 of them became millionaires. The ones who weren't educated all became millionaires. All of them, all my father and his brothers. All the ones that were educated became doctors. You know, now the doctors are great and they make their money. You know, but the brothers who weren't educated ended up financing the brothers who were doctors. You know, it was one of the jokes. You know, so it's a very important thing to understand, and it's this wonderful line, incommunicado, 48.3. I have this line. See, I know the very, very simple of business. You want, I got. How much? You know, in the end, it's nothing more, you know, than 2 hominids meeting each other, you know, and one's got a mushroom and the other one's got an apple. You know, it's like, you know, simple. It's simple. And the smarter that you try to get, the more complex it becomes, the more energy that's wasted, the less money that's made. You know, I rail against complexities, 35-page contracts that everybody thinks important. You know, simplicity is the nature of success, as it is the nature of being. Making money is simple. I know that. It's one of the simplest things I have ever known in my life. It's so simple. It's so simple. But the moment you make it complex, like making life complex, then you end up with all kinds of problems. The deepest problem, we'll see when we get to the ego, the deepest problem is undervaluation. Undervaluation. Oh, the analysts that said to me, I can't charge this. The teachers who have said to me, I can't charge this. The publishers who have said to me, I can't charge this. Are you nuts? You can charge anything you like. You can charge anything you like. If nobody buys it, you know it's a mistake. You know? You charge whatever you like. I mean, many of you remember that the very first book of letters was a photocopied piece of junk that I sold for 100 D-Mark. But what was inside was worth a fortune, according to my ego. You know, and this is a very simple thing. Supply and demand. It is simple. It is simple. You've got something. Do they want it? How much will they pay? How do you let them know you have it? How do you let them know it's good to have? It's all simple. So one of the things to recognize is you don't have to be a rocket scientist to be a success. You don't. You don't. You know, I watch every once in a while, CNN has these executive profile programs where you get half-hour interviews with leading CEOs and so forth and so on. Oh, fuck. You know, Tweedledum and Tweedledee. You know? I mean, they're great when they're talking about their business. You know, they have their set phrases, like talking to spiritual people. You know, they have their set phrases, you know. But ask them something that isn't part of their set language. Tweedledum and Tweedledee, you know, they're just obsessed, focused, simple beings who have a product that they figured out how to sell. You know? Simple. So remember this incommunicato. It's very, very important. Sometimes being too smart gets in the way of being a success. Individuality is a theme. I'm in the 57th gate. Individuality is a theme that deeply runs through everything about the life force. There's more individual gates than anything else. So you have this deep power of individuality. I go to that because I want you to understand that one of the most powerful senses for us is acoustic. It's acoustic. You know, the only way that you can really sell anything, the deepest way that you can sell something is acoustic. It's why, for example, that word of mouth, regardless of all other advertising, and all other advertising can initiate word of mouth, that word of mouth, one person telling another person about something independently, is the most powerful advertising we have. It is advertising that is seen without motivation. In other words, they're not telling you that it's great because they want you to buy it. They're telling you it's great because they've accomplished something. In other words, they've been able to progress in terms of style. And remember, individuality brings this whole business of that we have to adapt our styles, our clothing styles, our living styles, on and on and on. So when you come to the 57th gate, one of the things to recognize is how you get information across, and particularly in our age of, you know, radio and telemarketing and television and all of these various things. Acuteness, third line, the perfected intelligence where clarity eliminates doubt and ensures manifestation, the possibility of perfected intuition. There's a rare singularity, and it's about if what you are offering, if the truth of it can be heard, you will be able to move the product. The truth of it has to be heard. For many, many years now, in my work in establishing the human design updates, it was my goal to get to a place where it is pretty much today, in the sense that there are many contributors. And there are many contributors who are outside of directors of organizations who make contributions, Ilsa, Locks, Marianne, so forth. But people who are simply in design, enjoy design, and make contributions and write. And those articles have enormous impact. I mean, they have more impact than any of the advertising that's actually on the update itself. In other words, this is testimonial. This is that transformation of the experience to the other with clarity. And one of the things that it brings me to is something very important about the nature of operating any kind of enterprise in which you're not alone, is that it's all rooted in communication and what people actually hear. You know, we have listening and hearing. You know, I can be listening to the radio and hear nothing. You know, but if my favorite song comes on, I really hear it. You know? I mean, this is just the levels of attention, if you will. And it's one of the things to recognize about the ongoing operation of any enterprise is that it requires communication, but very important to see it is the acuteness. One of the real difficulties of human interaction is beating around the bush. You know this expression. To beat around the bush is not to go directly at things. You know, it's to go around them somehow. You know, it's kind of weave some kind of road that people they're following you and they don't know where the hell you're going, and all of a sudden you bring them to a point. You know, this is a technique that's often used by people. But acuteness is the key. In other words, if you can give clear directives and clear directives are heard, then you're going to have success. If people are just listening to the blah blah of any operational concept, it doesn't mean that they're going to actually be able to implement that. So acuteness is something that's very important. Brings us to the 50. A deeply significant gate. You know, the 50th gate is the source. As the 6th gate is the source of the wave, the 50th gate is the source of intelligence, what we call intelligence. And whether that's intelligence that develops out of intuition, out of instinct, out of judgment, and all of that intelligence is developed in order to create the strategies that allow for well-being. Remember, again, we're still dealing with the splenic system. We're still dealing with not holding on to things. That the 50th gate is the value of historical continuity, whose traditional values serve and enrich the present and the future. Historical continuity. You know, the original business model is the family, is the tribe, the small tribe, the clan actually, not even a tribe. This is the original business model, is the clan. And the clan has its history, and the clan must have its continuity. It is very difficult in very large impersonal organizations to be able to implement the responsibilities inherent in the 50th gate. The 50th gate provides the true continuity to be able to bring any and all of the enterprise together with a combined responsibility to being adaptable. This is the nature of adaptability. It's all about adaptability. You know, when you look at the lines in the Rei Vi Ching, the lines that have keynotes, you're born with them. That is, they're born whole. The lines that don't have keynotes are things that emerge over the lifetime. Adaptability is something that you have to be taught. You have to be taught how to adapt. Not everybody has a natural gift for adapting. As a matter of fact, you can see that this is very difficult when you have traditional values that you're trying to hold on to. Personal values that you're trying to hold on to. You know, past performance, past construction, past structural values you're trying to hold on to. And for many in the tribe, it is very difficult to adapt. They can't just adapt. You know, the tribal leader that's told, look, the women have a right to vote. Yeah, but for 3,000 years, they didn't vote. Yeah, we know that. Don't get upset. It's okay. But times are changing. You know, and if we don't change, then our women are going to leave the tribe. They're going to leave the clan. They're going to want to be in a world where they have, you know, and so forth and so on, and you go through this whole thing. So it's very important to see that teaching how to be adaptable is very important. It's the basic responsibility. Don't get stuck. Remember, the world's generated. We get stuck, we quit. You know, don't get stuck. Learn how to adapt. When unable to make it alone, will naturally align itself with nurturing and protective forces. The awareness that to maintain one's principles and values, the support of others is necessary. And this is very, very important. Otherwise, there's all this resentment that comes out. And resentment that comes out because the natural treasure of the old way seems to be ignored. It seems to be, looked at like it isn't respected anymore, and it's old-fashioned, and let's get rid of it and whatever. I love it when I can still go into one of the pueblos here and, there's a bunch of kids learning the traditional dance. It's an old story, but they don't live the way they did when those dances meant so much to them as a social mechanism. And yet at the same time, even though their lives have changed, and the way in which we live in this world, and Ibiza has a very first world phenomenon now, at the same time there is this continuity, so you can hold on to the bond and not feel like the past is something that you're embarrassed by because the future is something that's better. It's just movement. And the underlying theme is the survivability of the tribe. It's of the tribe. This is where you get concerns for the shareholder. It's not the concern for the bureaucracy or the ownership in that sense. It's the concern for all the little people. It's really nice for some executive to sit there and say, I'm going to downsize, I'm going to sell out, but the reality is that you've got all the little people. And it's the little people that hold the continuity together. They're the ones that maintain that continuity. They're the family. And the family can't be abandoned. And so how to adapt, how to maintain the continuity. This is one of the major things that the tribe is concerned about, and we see this in the great fears in the third world of globalization. The globalization is so threatening to their family clan model because at least the clan model cared about the little guy. And it seems that the globalization mechanism doesn't care about the little guy. That the little guy can simply get shafted. The great Enron monster. That the little guy and their life savings and their pensions and their, all of that just simply gets flushed down the toilet because of what went on, at the top, because nobody was caring about the little guy. This is responsibility. And it's not simply just teaching about how to be responsible to your own, but being responsible to your clients. Being responsible in terms of the way in which you deal completely with the work, and the work being the life, and it being intelligent, and it being of value to the other. So adaptability, unable to make it alone, naturally aligning, and it's those forces that naturally align to that. The 50th gate's the gate of Moses. Here's the law. But the law isn't God's law for me. I'm not going to be big chief uno number 10, and take everything in. This law is for you. It's for you. And this is one of the things to recognize about the 50, is that their responsibility is to the other. They're the ones who are here to say this is a value to the other. And it's also a value that the other is here with me in this enterprise, and so forth and so on. All right, let's get out of holding on to things that aren't good for you and go to trying to be mentally certain. Let's pretend that I know what I'm talking about.
Trying to get out of it.
I don't like the 44. All my life I've had to deal with this bird shit, It's a channel of birds and Okay. The 44th gate. Don't want to leave it out. The success of any interaction, is based on the absence of any preconditions. The success of any interaction is based on the absence of any preconditions. However, the theme is interference. Funny how life works. No preconditions, but the theme is interference, right? It looks like there's no preconditions. You know, it's like lovers meeting. It looks like there are no preconditions. But there are. There always are. There's always preconditions. Always, always, always. They're just not clearly stated or written out. They're there. They're there. And you have to see the difference between the 26 being hot-blooded and the 44 being cold-blooded. It's very different. The 44 is ruthless in its capacity. After all, the 44 has the most difficult job of all awareness. That is, managing the ego. It's not easy to manage the ego. So the 44 needs this capacity. Interference. The failure to interact based on circumstances, the ability to recognize the threat of interference, and to prepare for its effects, the alertness and instinct to handle the ego of others. This is the great gate of manipulation. Manipulation. The hand, mano, you know. Manipulation. And it's one of the things to understand about being able to derive the best out of the ego, is that it has to be manipulated. If you don't manipulate the ego, it will not respond. You know, the ego needs that. You know, if the 37 wants to manipulate the ego, it has to provide affection. If the 44 wants to manipulate the ego, it has to provide the massage. You know, the affection is you're wonderful. The massage is you're great. You know, the 44 is always there to massage the ego. Oh, you're wonderful. You had a great week. You're doing a great job. You know, because otherwise the ego won't give you its willpower. I mean, after all, the ego is not intelligent. It's not intelligent. And will is something that just doesn't go boop and arrive. It's drawn out. The ego is lazy. Basically, the ego likes rest much more than it likes effort. It just does. So it needs to be drawn out. So one of the things to understand about the 44 is that the 44 is always interfering. Always interfering. And interfering in a positive sense. I mean, you can see interference as negative. Interfering in the sense that it's trying to get the very best out of the ego. The 44 has very deep fears. It's the fear of the past. It's the fear of the past. So, you know, holding on to things from the past. This is directly out of the progression from the 32. You know, where the 32, where you see that the only way that you can transcend failure, you know, the only way that you can deal with that, you have to know how to adapt. The 50th gate that tells you have to learn adaptability. I mean, they're all saying the same thing. But the 44 actually has to make the ego adapt. I mean, it has to actually teach the ego how to adapt. And it has to adapt to different kinds of egos. All of that coming out of fear. Fear. You see, look, if the tribe can't get to the ego, they can't have their success. And the fear is that the clan will dissolve, that the genetic pool will disappear. And of course, the genes don't like that, after all. There is a great deal of projection caught up in the 44. Because the 44 is always trying to figure out what somebody can be based on inflating their ego. And what egos can be inflated, and how far to inflate them in order to control them. So this is really the hand, eh? And it's something to understand that this is the only direct connection, the heart center to the splenic center. This is the only direct connection between the ego and the heart and the stomach muscle and the gallbladder and the thymus gland and the T cells to the spleen. And this is one of the things that keeps tribal business, clan business healthy, is that there must be managers all the time. That the forces must be managed. That the ego dynamics must be managed, must be manipulated, must be cajoled, must be motivated, all of these things in order to avoid the fear of clan collapse, that the business will fail. Now can I get out of the spleen? Thank you. Chia. There's only 6 gates in the ajna, right? I should be able to work this one through. Maybe. 17. When we're dealing with the ajna center, the not self open ajna center, what that not self is all about, and it's the deepest, in many ways, not self, because it's mental to begin with, is pretending to be certain. People with open minds are always pretending to be certain because they don't want to be embarrassed. They don't want to be found out. They don't want to be ashamed. They don't want to live with anxiety. So they pretend that they are certain about things, and in that way everybody leaves them alone. Yes, I'm certain about that. Yes, I'm certain about that. Yes, I'm certain about that. Even though underneath that we know that there's all kinds of dilemmas. Okay. Basically what we're looking at when we're looking at the Ajna Center is selling certainty. We're selling certainty. Read my book and you'll be certain. Read this manual, you'll be certain. And, let me sell you certainty, so you'll be certain. And this is, of course, one of the great pitches of all time to the Ajna Center. The 17th gate, the ancient law that those who wish to rule must know how to serve. I'll have lunch at 1, Peter. And don't spill any wine. That's how you sell certainty. I used to be there. You can be certain about this diet because I took it. I was there. I worked my way up through the factory to the top. Let me tell you how you climb the ladder. So you can be certain too. Okay. And the whole thing about the certainty program, when you're dealing with the logical circuitry certainty program, is that you end up with teachers and followers. Hi. I'm a 62, I'm not a 17. So I sell you hierarchical certainties. Let me prove it to you. So you can be certain. Right? Oh yeah, it works this way. Right, we're certain now. Understanding the awareness that the best road is not necessarily the most interesting. God, what a line, eh? You read that and you go, oh shit. Really? It's like always never being allowed to drive into cities, but only being allowed to drive around the outside, the worst part, it's like, it's not very interesting, but however, it's the best road. The following of the best, this is Pluto, it's a Plutonic line. The following of the best road provides the experience necessary to meet the challenges of the road's end, right? Now, if you take shortcuts, you get there quicker, but you miss certain experience. Okay, it's all about understanding. So look, we have two kinds of teaching of certainty. We have the original human design educational program that took place in 30 minutes. This is the quick route. Alok was one of those graduates. 8 seconds after he met me, he was doing readings. This is the quick route. And then we have the long, extended route. We have the 7, 8, and 9-year warriors, who are on the long program of gaining certainty. And you can see that you sell two kinds of certainty, and you can see that in the way in which we sell education, because it's very much educational. Right? Certainty is about training people, educating them. This is where we have the thing that I think is the funniest. Let me go back to my father-in-law, the asshole. Eh? Let me go back to this jerk. Eh? All of a sudden in the 70s, the biggest, most expensive universities in the world began to really publicize, Masters of Business Administration, MBAs. And I kept on looking at my father-in-law. And I kept on thinking, yeah, I wonder how well he would do in that environment. Because, of course, this is the smart business environment. You can tell because of the quality of their suits. But nonetheless, it's a different story entirely. This is the educational stream. So remember something about the educational stream. If you're in the education business, we're all in the education business, we have always a binary to sell. It's what I've been selling. I sell the quick hit. You're a generator, make decisions in response, get lost. That's the quick hit. This is the shortcut. Certain things are missing, we know that. But the end result is that if they pay attention to that, we've achieved our goal. The other is the long route. To get to a place where we have 7-year experienced professionals and so forth and so on. And it's always very important to understand that that is the basic way in which we are receptive to education. There's the part of us that wants the quick hit. The dummy books, the Microsoft dummy books. They're an enormous success. They're an enormous success. Because everybody wants, dumb it down for me. Make it simple for me to get it quickly. Okay, that's one side. And the other side is, don't make it simple for me. Give me as much as I can digest. Give me everything that I can. Let me ponder the universe. Pile on the books for me. There are people who come to courses, if they don't walk away with books like this, they're really upset. I'm not being educated. It's like you go into your first literature class in university, you got a reading list that has 870 books. And you go out and say, got a heavy course this year. We're going to go deep. We're going to go really deep. And there's somebody else reading the comic book version. And so it's one of the things to understand about, the marketing of education. You've got two ways in which it goes. And of course, you've got scams in both. Let us not forget that. The get rich quick stuff that's mostly a scam. The long-term educational stuff. Who the fuck has been studying to be a Rosicrucian for 12 years? It's like there's a lot of long-term stuff that just makes you look weirder. You eventually look like, have you ever seen these druids that hang out at Stonehenge at the equinox? Or the solstice? Ooh, funny looking people, eh? Get really weird after a while, Peace. A harmonic condition of the individual or society that permits assessment before renewed action. I love that. Peace. Selling harmony. See, you can't, if you're abstract, you can't sell the truth. You know, you can sell a story. You can sell harmony. Many people will go into certain kinds of experiences and it doesn't matter to them whether the experience itself brings them to any particular expectation that was set up. But they enjoy the harmony of being in that experience with others. With others. It's like, well, if I'm really stupid doing this thing, at least I'm with them. You know? We're all stupid together. And we can enjoy each other and really find inner peace. You know? Ideas, eh? Ideas are such a vicious thing. Eh? Vicious, vicious, vicious thing. This is the gate of white magic. I mean, the 48's the gate of black magic, and you see that black magic in business doesn't work. But white magic, it's all over business. It's all over it. You know, our company, we have a real harmony here. You know? We're all really so peaceful with each other. You know? Okay, so once you get through the bullshit, underneath what you have is the third line theme of the realist. Don't you see the dichotomy between the 48 and the 11, these gates of magic? You know, the 48 gives you this depth, yes, yes, but incommunicado. You know? And then you get the white magic, it says, oh, harmony, harmony, harmony. But you get the realist. You know, thematically, it's all about, oh, okay, the acknowledgement that ideas, peace, that the ideas are transitory. The internal renewal to maintain strength and alertness, the realization that ideas come and go. Come and go. There is no way to avoid the abstract in order to be healthy. We need continuity out of the past. Ideas grow out of past experience. Ideas can be very powerful. You know, think tanks, bull sessions, you know, the kinds of things where you break down the hierarchy in a situation so that everybody is free to speak. You know, one of those kinds of things in which, you know, you got an idea box. You know, the suggestion box? This is the suggestion box in any company. And if you ever put a suggestion... I've done that. Oh, that's really funny. I'll never do that again. Put a suggestion box up. You get a lot of suggestions. You have to read them all. Most of them are sheer nonsense. And some of them really piss you off. Eh? I mean, talk about harmony. It's like, what do you mean? I know why you're suggesting that, you nasty ingrate, you know, and blah, 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 blah. However, every once in a while, one of those suggestions really work. There's this great, it's one of the funny ads for me that's on television. It really takes nerve to put an ad like that on television. It's one of these, I don't know, industrial ads or whatever. And it's about an executive in New Mexico who works for an olive company, a company that sells jarred olives. And he was in the efficiency department. And one day as he opened a jar of olives and he took one out,